And welcome to episode 61 of the Brewed Sages. Stormbound players with a head for the game. I am Freeloader, and with me, as always, are Subaiku and Thomas. Subaiku, how's it going tonight?
Fantastic.
And Thomas, how are you doing?
Pretty all right.
We also have a special guest this week, Mock23. Mock, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Hey, guys.
We are the Brewed Sages, easily the second best Stormbound-related podcast in production. And as a reminder, you can always follow us at Brewed Sages on Twitter. Or for all of you who've ever found yourself searching for your phone, using your phone's flashlight to do so, our email address is thebrewedsages@gmail.com. Before we get into our main topic, which I'm very excited about tonight, and the reason for Mox joining us, we also need to do a little bit of revisiting of our last episode, guys, because as it turns out, even before the cards got released, we had a few balance changes. Sabaiku, can you give me the first one?
Yeah, Vavel the Looper. Still a legendary. They didn't change that, unfortunately. Still 3 mana, but the strength is down. It used to have 9 strength at level 5. Now it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 strength. So,
That's basically right after the buff.
yeah, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strength, but with 2 movement. So now, before moving, it gains 1, 1, 1, 2, 2 strength and still keeps the teleport to the first empty tile behind. So now it functionally is a 3 mana, 7 strength, 2 movement, but it will continue to grow if it sticks on the board and isn't frozen, I guess. And it keeps the funky teleport mechanic, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, and just to be clear, even though it's 2 movement, it teleports twice, right? It teleports back, moves forward, teleports back, moves forward again.
It teleports once to
Okay.
its starting position and then moves 2 tiles from there. Before moving only triggers once before movement, not before each individual tile. So
Gotcha.
Think of
the
sparkly
fact that
kitties.
exactly. So now that it has 2 movement, you can actually still use it defensively much more flexibly. You can use it on your baseline to clear 2 units, which is fantastic.
Thomas, what do you think?
It's really, really good in draft, especially when you're playing it in a Mistwives deck. When you're essentially on equals, your first turn you open with this. It has 3 strength in the middle of the board, and then the next turn, because your opponent most likely doesn't have enough movement to do any damage to it, it's going to buff itself to 4 strength, and then you get to proc a 7 strength Mistwives, getting real close to their base.
Goodness, it's almost like you've played it and the Hearth.
Even better. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Having just one draft with it, it was a monster in the draft mode. It definitely helped to get me to an easy 6-0 with that run.
Did you level it up at all, or did you? I mean, legendaries are infamously difficult.
I did find one upgrade for it, so it got one extra strength, which was nice but not necessary.
All right, and Mock, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, what Thomas described just now seems dirty. I love it. I have enjoyed it in draft, but I've been racking my brain about what kind of deck to build it into in ladder, and I can't think of one, but I actually loved it in draft.
Well, as I mentioned in the last one, the fact that it's a dragon hero is fairly important for this particular mechanic, right? Because a lot of the dragon cards only produce value when there's already a dragon on the board. So having a persistent dragon on the board takes cards, like Dreadful, for example. And not that I think Dreadful is going to be an amazing card now that Vavel is here, but at least it makes the likelihood of finding value from Dreadful a lot higher when you've got just this persistent giant tank of a dragon sitting on the board. I think there's a dragon deck out there somewhere, maybe one that uses Sunbeam. I'm not sure. If so, Arthas will find it. But I'm very enticed by this. Does anybody have it at level, at a playable level yet?
I'm waiting until September for it.
I have level 2. That's it.
All right.
I'm with Thomas on this one. Yeah, wait till September. We suspect there's going to be an anniversary event, so try to hold out.
Yep.
Sabaiku gave us a Vavel. Thomas, can you give us Guardy the Lightbringer?
All right, so being dropped down by 1 mana cost from 5 down to 4, and now its strength is going across the board 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it gets 1 movement. So it is like every 4 mana neutral card these days. 8 strength, 1 movement, 4 mana cost card, which is totally normal specs for
Mm-hmm.
it. But now the ability is before moving, if there are no enemy units in front, create a 0 cost, level 5, single use, non common temple card and add it to your deck. Quite the wordage. Um, lot going on there. The first thing to point out is you now, my gripe about it before was that you had no control whether you were going to get a temple or not, and your opponent had the complete ability to decide whether or not they should give you that temple. Now you do get the opportunity to decide when you want a temple and when you do not want a temple. If it's late game, you probably don't care about it, and if you need to play defensively, then you can attack into opponent things. And if it's early game and you really want that 0 cost for your 6 mana turn,
Spoiler,
then
you don't.
then you get to decide. So much better than it was before.
Yeah, yeah. At least if nothing else, it has like the standard vanilla stats for a 4 mana card now. Sabaiku, you've had a couple more weeks to kind of rack your brain on this. Have you come up with a 0 cost non-common temple card that you want to have randomly added to your deck?
Well, if you're playing Hearthguards, any of them are fine. That's about the best that I got, right? Like if you're playing an aggressive Hearthguards Ironclad deck, like your opponent knows to try to block off the unstable build, to try to remove the unstable build if they can. So maybe you slot this in as a 4 mana tech card instead of Windmakers or Scrapped or the new Eloth. You put Guardy in the 4 mana slot. You have another backup, so you're not your whole plan is not contingent upon leaving an unstable build on the board. It could add a little more reliability to that deck. It could also screw up the
You're
cycling of
card
that deck.
cycling. Oh my gosh.
It could also, completely backfire because you have to use Guardy to trade in order to, keep control of the board or whatever. And if there's something in front of it, you just don't get that temple.
And nobody is thinking there's a Temple Guardians deck with this, right? Mock Temple Guardians deck with
Yeah, I
the
mean,
Guardy?
it crossed my mind, but it's still Temple Guardians is still slow.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? Getting Temple Guardians to proc was not the hard part of that because if you left a temple on the board, your opponent didn't want to remove it because it wasn't a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Yeah, I have still not been able to find the theoretical deck that Guardy fits in that's like the missing piece.
Hearthguards is right. A zero
Yeah.
cost temple structure, whatever for Hearthguards.
But I feel like in that deck, and for those of you who don't know who Eli Manning is, I apologize, but it's the Eli Manning of that deck. Eli Manning, for those of you who don't know, was a quarterback for the New York Giants. He had a reputation for being absolutely abysmal for 3/4 of every game, and then he had Hall of Fame level stats for the fourth quarter of games. And as I have pointed out many times to Sabaiku, the only reason why Eli Manning had such good stats late game is because he needed them. If only he played at an average level the rest of the game, he didn't need heroics to win. And I feel like Guardy the Lightbringer does the same thing here, right? Like, it's amazing if you can find the free temple on the same turn as the Hearthguard so that you can come up with an improbable win. But having played a lot of Hearthguard's decks, what I have found often is if you can just maintain good discipline and a strong sort of deck attack against your opponent, you don't even need it to proc against the unstable build. You just need the 7 damage. A lot of times, I would win just playing Hearthguards without any temple or structure on the board because I didn't need it.
Yeah, but the nice thing that you're going to have now, if you do get that 0 mana cost card, is you're going to be able to play like Wild Saber Paws and then the Temple, and then still play Hearthguards on the 8 mana turn. I don't know how often it's been like on the 8 mana turn, you really needed to play unstable build and Hearth Guards, but you didn't have any extra mana to try and clear out your opponent's defensive line for that Hearth Guards going in.
That's fair. I thought you originally were saying if you had no front and you just needed like on 8 mana to try to, and I'm like, that's exactly the Hail Mary I'm talking about. You've already put yourself behind the 8 ball in the first 3 quarters of that game if you need a Hail Mary on 8 to come up with 14 damage for the win. Like, but yeah, there are definitely times where you need to play defense, or you need to clear your opponent's defense to make the Hearthguards possible, and that is a very interesting little foreshadowing into the main topic that we'll come to in a little bit. But first, on the very day that we are recording this episode, which for us is August 17th, Heroes League is getting a little update. I guess I'll take this one since since the other two of you guys got to have one of the balance changes. Uh, there is a matchmaking improvement happening in the Heroes League. For those of you who are up there, you'll notice that it happens fairly often now that you can just keep queuing into the same opponent multiple times in a row. Sheepyard's done some data collection. They took a look at the data, and they have decided that to improve the queue times and all the rest of that, they're pushing a little fix today that's going to make that experience better in both your queue times, and hopefully you don't run into the same opponent multiple times in a row. We will keep an eye on it and look for our next episode near the end of the month, which would be the one with the September patch notes. We'll give you guys some feedback on whether or not we've noticed a substantial change or not. I guess I have to get out of Diamond 5 at some point to start testing. But I know Sabaiku's in the Heroes League already. And Thomas, are you as well?
I'm not
Yeah.
playing around with
Okay.
Diamond 1.
So we'll get
Slackers.
around to testing it. Mark, where are you at?
Oh, somewhere in Diamond.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm carrying the rear here. I've played literally 2 games on ladder. One of both with that Diehards deck. I'm still enjoying playing Diehards. It's pretty fun. It's the one that Thomas and I brought to Heroes League last month on the last night.
Well, at one point I was excited about Heroes League, and I was playing a winter deck, but then I realized everyone else is playing the same deck, so I've gone back to my old standard, which is just kind of a chip, horrible kind of thing. It
Right.
always gets me to Heroes League, but I never go very far with it.
For a lot of us, that's all we want to do is just get to Heroes League. So, why don't we move on from here then into the main topic? And the main topic is actually, Mock, you've been working on a little bit of a guide, right? And give us some background on the guide that you've been trying to put together here.
Well, I thought I looked at all of the stuff that was online, and I had been playing a bunch of draft stuff, and I keep seeing certain kinds of what I perceive as mistakes. Now I'm not at the top of the Heroes League, and I thought, well, maybe I could write a guide for kind of advanced players. They get a little bit of the game, but there are some things that they might benefit from asking themselves when they play. And it's based on some chess and some Go or Baduk guides that I've seen before. It is basically a set of questions you might ask yourself before making your play.
And I just want to let our listeners know we see this kind of as a follow up to episode 58, While Improvement Equals True. This is kind of in a vein of episodes that we want to slowly dole out over time that kind of give pointers on how to improve your game. Otherwise, I don't know why you listen to us. Honestly, I don't know why anybody does anyway. But it's our goal to try to provide some insights into how to play better. And both Sabaiku and I have already had a conversation with Mock about this a guide. And one of our initial reactions was this would actually make an interesting episode of the Brewed Sages if we all kind of just drop these ideas into the vat of the podcast and sort of shake it up and stir it around and see what comes out. So what you're going to hear is not our like pre-planned thoughts on each of these things. It is sort of for all of these concepts, it's just kind of our first initial reaction. The 2 things that I want everyone to kind of bear in mind in it are that there will be some topics and some ideas, some questions that you think are obvious and stupid, and why should you be asking yourself those kinds of questions? And you can garner from that, I believe, your play style. If those kinds of questions are the ones that you answer automatically every turn without even having to push yourself, that's your play style. That's what you do well. The ones that you're like, oh gosh, I don't even think of that, or oh yeah, I know I'm supposed to think of that, but I never do. Those are the things you struggle with. That's the play styles that you don't play as well. So that's concept one. And then concept two that I want to kind of tint everything with, there are questions in here, Mock, like the first two, your first two questions in your draft, right, are you playing too defensively, and do you even need to defend? If so, how to do it? Those questions, in my opinion, start at the most basic fundamental sort of level of Stormbound. Those are the same questions that the top player in HL is asking himself in his last game of the season. Am I playing too defensively? Do I need to defend? Can I risk it here? Do we go for the win? These are those kinds of nuanced questions, man. That's a lifelong pursuit, trying to find out if you can answer that right or wrong. In my opinion, when a player is hot, they're answering these questions exactly right, way more often than average. And when they're struggling, they're answering them incorrectly more often. This is almost, in my mind, the definition of a hot player is when they know exactly the right mode to be in at the right time. So, without further ado, Mock, why don't you just give us pick randomly? Let's just start picking randomly. Pick one of the questions from this, and let's see what comes out of it. I'm very curious to see. Like, let's hear Thomas's reaction first.
Well, I feel like I don't want to pick randomly
You
because
don't have
I
to.
did front load it. So that question, are you playing too defensively?
Okay.
You must sometimes defend. But when I have played draft, I constantly win games because my opponent has decided to play too defensively. I feel like it's too easy to play to worry about I don't know, eliminating all of your opponent's stuff. And I would have easily lost, I don't know, dozens and dozens of games if my opponent had been just a little bit more aggressive. That being said, it is a nice edge of balance. So my question is, are you playing too defensively? You should ask yourself that. But the way you ask yourself that is, in the form of other questions. Do you have another play that you could make that maybe defends you a little bit, but also moves you further down the board? Can you can you put a cheap runner, at least a cheap runner, down the board? Could you put a couple units forward instead of like one big heavy that's going to block things? Instead of blocking and like trading, can you just like put your stuff next to the enemy and see what happens? Because they're going to have to deal with your aggression just as much as you know you feel you need to defend.
It's interesting that you bring up the differences that you feel in draft specifically, because I feel, and Thomas, your opinion on this, but I feel like in draft it's so much more difficult to build a control deck, anything that's geared to do anything other than be fairly aggressive, because you don't have control of the cards you're picking. So trying to build a deck that has that sort of controlling set of cards in it is quite difficult. I don't know, Thomas. Have you been able to play a deck that's successfully defensive?
There are ultimately no control decks in draft because Blade Storm is one of the worst cards in that mode. Hunter's Vengeance is terrible, and you're very unlikely to get it. So there's not really any control decks except for like Shadow Fen Convert. But those cards are just really good that you want to jam into any deck anyway. So they're still not even control decks.
So with that in mind, then don't you need to play less defensively in draft?
Absolutely. I mean, you every time you do a streaming session, I'm constantly talking about. It seems like it's unlikely your opponent has a runner here. You might as well just go more aggressive. Saying that every single turn.
Yeah, for me, this is really a question of macro strategy, which is how I like to think of it, which is trying to evaluate what your opponent's deck is going to do and what your deck is capable of doing, and just trying to make sure that you're advancing your game plan and trying to make sure that you're denying your opponent their game plan. If you think that they're being aggressive, then yes, err on the side of defense. If you think that they don't have the tools to defend, err on the side of offense. Like push it. If you're not in danger of dying, or if you can use part of your resources to defend and be more aggressive with the rest of it, definitely err on the side of attacking. And in draft mode, especially, it's I think that's where the good draft players have an advantage. It's not necessarily choosing the cards in the draft or choosing the upgrades. It's evaluating how they're going to play the deck once they draft it, but before the match even starts.
All right, I've thought of a scenario that comes into my mind here, because this is the kind of thing that Sabaiku would yell at me. I'm coming up with, thinking through things and just trying to imagine, when would Sabaiku yell at me and call me an idiot?
Anytime you defend.
Right,
Defense is
exactly.
for suckers.
So here's a perfect example of the kind of too defensively mistake that I make. Right, I make this quite often, and Mock, I think this kind of gets to this idea. When I'm playing a mid-range Shadowfen deck and my opponent is playing a Zuri Bucks deck, I used to I would find myself in this situation quite often where my opponent, I've got like let's say a 4 or 5 health unit in the middle of the board. My opponent has 2 units around it, and my play can either be talk sacking that unit and basically clearing his board or almost clearing his board and playing maybe like 1 unit, or ignoring everything and just going onto his baseline. And I would routinely talk sack my unit, blow it up, lose all chance of any sort of aggression, just putting like a gifted recruits onto their second row and trying to reset the board. And I would lose those games. And the reason why I would lose those games is because Zuri and Bucks over the long run are going to make units and columns of units that are just too big. And if I just gave up and said, screw it, you know what? You can have Bucks trading into this 4 health unit, but I'm going to put 10 health on your baseline for you to do that.
Exactly.
Denying that value felt like such an important thing early in my Stormbound career. And honestly, still, I make this mistake a lot. Denying that Bucks value. Like, no. He's going to trade into it. It's going to get so much. These units are going to get so big. Yeah, but none of them are going to be on your baseline. Who cares? Let him take 10.
Sometimes all you need to defend is like a 1 strength cat that costs you 2 mana. That's it. You're just much lighter on the defense for the most part. Obviously, once you are familiar with your opponent's deck and you know what's at risk and you know what might be coming, then you're going to have to make more nuanced decisions. But you don't always have to grind up all of your opponent. You don't have to eliminate all of their strength. You can just lightly block and then move forward.
Yeah, and I think in draft it's even worse, right? Because trying to get a feel for what your opponent's deck is doing is so much more difficult because of the randomness of the draft. In draft mode,
Sure.
especially, you should always err on the side of aggression, both because your deck can probably defend worse than it should be able to in ladder, but also you're trying to get some semblance of what you're trying to deny from your opponent is quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, almost until the point it's too late.
Exactly.
Well, we know everything, but my opponent has 10 mana and I've got 10, and anything can happen. It's different when you're playing in the ladder. You know the meta. You really know what could be coming. You don't always see that in draft.
No, and sometimes you get surprises on the ladder too. Like, you leave a unit blocking Forgotten Souls, but it turns out this is the guy that runs Herald Sim instead, and you lose that game. And
Yeah,
you take those losses and you move on to the next game. You played as well as you could.
I just feel it's better to play lightly. I mean, you can play. I mean, I don't know what I'm trying to say. You can play light. You can play lighter on the defense than you fear.
Yep, you don't commit all of your resources
Right.
to defense because then then you're allowing your opponent to continue attacking, right? If you pose problems that they also have to answer, then you're taking back some of the initiative and some of the tempo in the match.
Also, like the amount of times that or I see people absorbing too many units into an opponent's stuff that a Forgotten Souls would have been able to send into base, regardless of you sinking all of your entire turn towards it or putting all of your units on your opponent's baseline. If you're going to lose to a Forgotten Souls anyway, just put everything on your opponent's baseline, because if they have it no matter what you did. And if they don't have it, then you win.
That's the
Right. Right.
I think that's that Sabaiku has this phrase that he says to me a lot, because again, this issue of being too defensive is definitely my issue. I'm a controlling player at heart. And
I'm with you a little bit there.
make them have it. I can hear him even when he's not streaming with me and I'm playing. I can hear his voice telling me, make them have it. In a situation where I can put lethal on their board and just say, if you have Forgotten Souls and Pog, I lose. Okay, let's see what you got. Uh, uh, I win more often than not when I put my opponent in those situations. The cycle fails them, or whatever it happens to be. They cannot answer my demand. Right. That brings me to kind of the next thing that you have here. If you need to block, have you considered all your options? This is another issue that I've seen several times on ladder. And I'm positive I saw it. I thought I saw it in one of Sabaiku's videos recently, but it was not the one that I thought. Um, I will see people every once in a while defend when I've got one unit on their baseline and they put a unit on their penultimate row, which only allows me one column for runners. Like, if you're not going to block runners, why put any unit on your penultimate row? Like, only allowing me to put unit runners in column D. Okay, well, here comes saber paws and here comes goats and we're good to go. Like, why only defend half the board like that?
Oh, instead of like pretending that both sides had front and there's nothing else that they can do. Like, let's say instead
Yeah,
of
yeah, exactly.
gifted recruits, they had a lawless herd.
Right.
Might as If they couldn't do a true defense, then they might as well have just put it at the most furthest forward that they could.
And that's your advice to me every time we stream together, is like, I'm like, should I put something back? And you're like, why? What's it going to do? The column D is open. You can't stop that. So then why put something in column B? What are you hoping? Like, what's the goal of that unit in B? But it is my knee jerk reaction to want to at least put something there so that they can't overload my baseline, right?
Hmm.
But what's the odds of that even happening?
Right. By being more aggressive with those units, instead, you're preventing them from overloading your baseline just because they have to answer the pressure if they don't have lethal.
Precisely. And I think that's the big issue in a lot of this mock, that a lot of these questions are getting to, is this issue of, unless they have lethal, by putting your units on their baseline, you are forcing them to take resources off your baseline that they would have put there and instead use them defensively. So it's the same net effect of not allowing them to load on your baseline, whether you put it on the second row or on their on their baseline, right? And I think that's part of what people miss.
Yeah, you definitely want to commit as few of your resources to defense as you need to, and as much to offense as you can. In most of the time, that's assuming that you're playing maybe the more aggressive deck in the matchup. If you're playing the more defensive deck in the matchup, then maybe you do want to err on the side of more defense because you assume that you're going to win the long game. But again, that gets back to the question of macro strategy. Do what your deck is trying to do. If your deck is trying to just stall the game until you get to that 9 mana turn, and then you're gonna OTK with Siren and Wolf Cloaks, or you're gonna heal up with Ulf and put the game out of reach for your opponent, then do that. But if you're the one that's being more aggressive, it's probably a better idea to continue that aggression instead of trying to play defense.
So Thomas, looking at a lot of these questions, the one thing that I'm a little anxious about, if for Mock to publish this, is in a lot of games, he mentioned checkers, he mentioned Go, or sorry, he mentioned chess and Go. It's fairly easy to reset the board to the state of the issue in question and analyze it from different sides. I feel like Stormbound is so complex that a question like, have you considered all your options on what to use as a blocker? Boy, the answer is probably always going to be no for me because I've got 4 cards in hand. There's a lot,
It's
and there's
Ah,
it is still pretty
you can
straightforward
count
though.
to 4, my friend. You can count to 4.
It is straightforward though. We know so many cards in this game have 5 strength when you're playing in the upper leagues, and
hmm
so if you only have 1 unit to block, it probably not the 5 strength unit that can be cleared by a green prototypes.
fair.
Because then you do your sparkly kitties, because then you're forcing them to have a 6 strength thing, and then you put your green prototypes on their baseline rather than that 1 extra strength on their baseline.
I like it. I like it. Okay. All right. So we do think that these are questions that if you sit down and really analyze and contemplate, that you should be able to get an answer for. All right. I'll go along with that. I do still see, by the way, speaking of kitties, I still see a lot of people opening with their kitties playing it against one of their sidewalls. So either in column A
Slap
or
their hand.
D, and I was doing it. I have to admit, Thomas, until you explained to me that no, that's a terrible idea. You need to play it in one of the 2 middle columns to open a game, and please explain why.
Because you want your sparkly kitties to be on the outside, because that's going to reduce the likelihood that their sparkly kitties can reset your sparkly kitties. They only have a 50% chance of attacking into your sparkly if you get your sparkly on the side of the board. They then have to have dubious hags or destructo bots to be able to do that for the same mana cost with 100% likelihood.
Right, right. So in other words, if I play it in A, I know Kitties is going to move into B and then move up. That means if my opponent has 2 units that they can play, the second one can be the Kitties and that clears my Kitties
With
because
100%
with
certainty, yes.
100% certainty. If I play mine in B and 50% chance it slides into A, now getting rid of that is super difficult and it requires, to your point, a coin flip or having exactly the right card in hand.
Yep. Just like to what Subiku was always saying, force them to have it. You never ever want to give your opponents a choice when you don't have to give them anything.
So this goes into one of the questions that Mock has here. The edge of the board, units on the outside columns have fewer interactions than the ones in the middle. Do you think through all of that? I can tell you from personal experience, Mock, that a lot of the people I play against in Diamond and Heroes League still haven't fully adapted to just the fact that kitties playing. I've been playing a diehards deck, and I am ashamed to admit it. I played I think a dozen games against Stony J two months ago, testing it out, and we're just scrimmaging back and forth. I literally played opened with diehards like 4 or 5 times in a middle column, and every time he would send me a chat going, "Dude, what are you doing?" It's such a freaking habit. Being mindful of all of these issues is a big deal. Like, Mock, you've been writing it. How many of these things do you find that you that just writing these things down and looking through them and thinking, like, how much better of a player do you feel you are just sort of trying to become more mindful of these things?
Oh, I mean, I doubt that I've gotten any better. Although listening to Thomas just now, I feel like I got, well, 1/10% better on like one margin of one thing.
You want another
Um,
little tidbit
no,
with the
I
edge of the
love that
board?
tidbit. Sure.
Okay, so when you're playing against Swarm, it used to be back in the day that you wanted to kind of play in the center of the board to try and clog things up because Reckless Rush has such a hard
Right.
time when you
Right.
are clogging up the center of the board. With all of the super interactive cards these days, Loris, just the other 10 million cards I don't want to go on for days, start playing on the corners of the board. You can tell they're like, oh, I'm playing against General Akbar. Like, they will quit playing super aggressively because it's going to feel like you are trying to shove them off over to one side of the other side of the board for you to be able to set up whatever you're setting up. and they are going to start playing
Oh,
way more defensively in these upper hero leagues.
no way. They're literally outplaying themselves.
Let's hope that's just a little bubble that will evaporate after they adjust to the new reality.
It will, and then you'll have to slot in Void Surgers at with an for a legitimate threat. But yeah, no, it's been working pretty well.
Nice, nice.
That is super
I do
interesting.
that in decks, especially where I run Twilight Prowlers. If I'm playing a more defensive, heavier deck, I will definitely try to control an edge of the board because I know Twilight's going to clear everything off of my baseline anyway.
Oh, that's
Hmm.
gross.
Very good point.
So, with all of these different questions, Mock, do you find that they sort of fall into categories?
I mean, some are clearly like very small. None of these, by the way, this whole set of questions sort of avoids completely the issue of deck building, and really even what faction your opponent is playing. They're meant to be super general. Some are microscopic and some are like super big. So the big picture, my big picture question is, I think the best sub question of this is, don't stop at your first right answer. Like, you think you have a good play, you have a little bit of time. Definitely always consider at least one alternative move. If you
Mm.
don't, you're stuck, or you're like a hyper genius, and obviously no one is ever going to stand a chance against you. But if you're me, like, I really need to look at the options. And I feel like some people are really pretty reactive. And given the timed nature, like, there's a little pressure to be reactive, but you have all of that timer is yours and you should take it, unless you're suffering like lag or something like that. So, like, consider more than one option. Like, what's the board going to look like at the end of your opponent's turn? And that could look at, you at least consider two or three ways that might turn out before you make your move.
Yep, I definitely do that evaluation of what cards are in my hand and what can I play on the board while my opponent is playing out their turn, because I want to have an idea before I cycle a card. All right, if I draw dead, if I draw siren or whatever, and I can't play it, what am I going to do with the rest of the cards in my hand? What's the play I'm going to make? If I draw something better, what's the play that I'm going to make? You rarely want to cycle a card and just hope you get something good. You want to have a plan in place for what happens if you draw something good and what happens if you draw something bad.
Right, right. I mean, you should be optimistic. You should like expose yourself to like the best opportunities, but you still have to be realistic and figure out, like, okay, if it didn't turn out quite my way, do I have a good backup? And maybe your most bold play is like too risky, and you realize, okay, I have to take the one that's like solid. Usually, it's not the most defensive play
No,
that's going to win you.
no. Sabiko says this a lot to me. Give yourself the chance to high roll.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. You should expose yourself to a good opportunity.
Yeah, and it's never you're never trying to high roll defensively.
Well, sometimes you really need that hunter's vengeance to come back faster than you expect.
I should say the other kinds of questions are questions I ask myself. Like, here's one that is like, sometimes you have to do the math. Like, I don't know if my opponent has messed up their math, but I am painfully aware when I have screwed up my math. Like, I don't always track my mana costs correctly because there's like two or three numbers on these cards, and this will sound stupid, like, to people who are, I don't know, like geniuses or like never forget anything, or but as an intermediate player, like, I can mess up how much mana cost there is. I could swap that with the strength of my unit, or worse, even like how far it moves. Like, there's three numbers on cards. So, like, you sort of have to give yourself an extra second to say, am I doing the math right? Am I even doing my trades right? Like, I think I'm going to come out one strength ahead, but I screwed up because I swapped like the level of, of my unit versus its strength.
Oh yeah, especially in draft. I make that
Right.
mistake in draft a lot.
All of that stuff is like how much, and like you look at your opponent's mana and you're like, how much damage could they do to my position? Like how many units could they end up leaving on the board? Or if they had a big fat unit, like how big is it? And you have to calculate that. So you have to like do some math, and in a few seconds that you have, you should take the time to do the math. Don't always play hot and reactive, because if you're like me, you're going to be like, well, I'm a bear of limited brain and I'm going to like swap a few things. But if I like, okay, if I double check, I'll be better off.
It's fine. Math is hard. Just play the cards in your hand. Eventually, you run out of mana and you can't play anymore.
Well,
That's when you know
okay.
your turn is over.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I could play that way, but sometimes I do.
I often mess up mana cost still, even after years of playing this game.
The funny thing for me is often I will actually get myself into the paralysis by analysis trap. Trekking Alderman is my favorite card in the game, and so I will literally sit there and try to extrapolate the different potential outcomes of putting trekking in front of this unit, and what are the odds that this other unit reduces its health from the trekking getting procced, such that it won't, when it moves, it doesn't kill my unit. Like, you know, I'll get into these terrible things where I'm like, well, is it better to play it in front of the 5 health unit and then be more or less likely to clear everything else? Or should I put it in front of the 1 health unit and keep it at 6 health? But then I'm only doing 5 health to the rest of their board. Is that enough? Like that kind of math with trekking for me has become like super. I need to start it at the beginning of my turn and I'll rope, and then I'll finally just be like, screw it, just put it in front of something and let's go.
That's interesting. I mean, unless you want tracking to proc twice, my theory of tracking is I put it in front of the fattest unit that it's going to do. It's going to eat all that, and then
I value
everything else is going to go to whatever else is my opponent has.
That
I
is correct.
value keeping trekking when I'm playing Shadowfen. I value keeping trekking above 4 health or 4 health or more. So that way I can threaten my opponent that I could have witches in hand. Do you really want to leave it on the board and let me proc it again? So
I'd guess
Well, that's too big brain for me. I just make it eat the biggest, and then I know it's going to do its maximum effect.
I don't want to leave it large against Winter or against Ironclad because Ironclad has plenty of 6 strength things to take out, even
sure,
a 6 strength, or
or
Windmakers to
win
just get even
makers.
more value. And then obviously against Winter with Zhev. No point in giving them that extra value for no reason.
Sure. Hmm.
But against opponent Shadowfen and Swarm, then it's perfectly acceptable to leave it larger.
Interesting. So it's actually an opponent's faction specific answer as to whether or not to
Yeah,
trade big or trade small.
and I know that was another one of your questions that you had, Maka. Knowing your opponent's deck, where was that?
It was probably farther down because it takes a while to get to know your opponent, especially in draft. You don't exactly know what they have, but at a certain point, you'll be able to guess.
Yeah, well, or at least guess that whatever's left is so bad they won't play it. Like, you have no idea how often that's happened where I've played a game of draft and I've seen 10 of my opponent's 12 cards and it was a terrible deck. And I'm like, wait, what was it that you were cycling away every time? Because what you played was terrible.
Yeah, I think I claimed as the game goes on, you should have an almost exact idea about what your opponent has. Well, that's like true in the ladder, with the
Yeah, yeah,
exception of maybe there's always a whammy. You should always leave room for the opponent having some sort of whammy that it's going to throw you off. But as you play, even in draft, you should be monitoring, and I feel like that should be obvious to advanced players, but I feel like intermediate players don't take enough advantage of this, and that also relates to the cycle. Like, when are they going to have their good card or the card that you fear the most? And all of that has to do with like being willing to track a little bit more. And Arthas is great at this. Like, he knows the cycle, he knows the opponent's cycle, and there's a great edge gained by working out what your cycle is going to be and tracking what your opponent's cycle is going to be. But that's effortful. And some people can do this in their brain, and other people have to take little notes. Like I used to keep a little set of post-its in front of me, like 6 post-its, like where my cards were, so I could know when they were going to come up. Because there's no shame in using like an external device to help your human memory.
Oh gosh, could you imagine if somebody made like a third-party HUD that gave you like the percentages
Well,
for each card?
that would be a little
Yeah.
nasty. I have thought about that myself, but I was like, nah.
You can get that in Hearthstone. Hearthstone has several deck trackers which will.
There's 12 cards in a deck plus whatever people have added to them. It's not that hard.
Which means it should be easy to code.
And somehow I screwed up anyway.
It's probably tragically easy to code. But
Mm.
along those lines, like, I have like cycling. You should pay attention to your cycling if you haven't. If you want that edge, if you feel like you've hit some limit in your game, like, "Oh, I can't seem to get any better," start tracking your cycling properly. And start monitoring what your opponent has done.
Yeah.
Like even crudely, even if you're just thinking about like what is that one card that your opponent has had? When did they play it? When are they most likely to see it again? If you do that, you'll have an edge. And that's all this game is about, is like little edges.
Even to your point, Mark, crudely is a great way to describe how I tend to do it, which is just if I saw it last turn, they probably don't have it again. If I've seen them play it and they didn't play it last turn, they probably have it in their hand, so play around it, right? Like that's most of the time that's just enough.
Right, right.
That was
And
this was the biggest eye opener when I first pinged Reckless in Discord in the Stormbound Discord. He had shared his deck list with me, the Reckless Rush deck list, whatever version it was back then. And I'm like, dude, I can't get past Platinum 2. It just won't work. There's too many big, high level decks. I just can't do it. So he's like, all right, well, why don't we do a little coaching session? I'll sit with you for like an hour. And we did. We streamed it. And I kid you not, every freaking time he'd be like, okay, we're going to play these cards. You're going to get Forgotten Souls. And then we'll cycle a card and you'll get Pog and you'll win next turn. Every time. How on earth are you keeping it? It was just like the easiest thing. It's like, no, 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 no. Don't play 2 cards. You need to play 3 cards right now. So that way we get back to Forgotten Souls. So you need to play that and you need to play Green Prototypes and Summon Militia because we need to play 3 cards this turn. And the fact that he was less concerned about what we were doing this turn and more concerned about what we were cycling ourselves into for the subsequent turn was such an eye-opening, like mind-blowing realization for me. This turn didn't matter as much as getting the right cards for next turn was not a mindset I had ever even contemplated before getting coaching from him.
nice, nice. Yeah, and then that's often right. I mean, you still have to play your best turn, but
Of course.
if you are thinking about the cycle and what has to happen for your plan to be carried forward, like how else can you succeed except by tracking a little bit your cycle?
I think that MERS is a great example for this, right? Like people love to put MERS in slower decks because, oh, I'm trying to make the game go long. I'll come back and get that token. It'll help me out later on in the game. Like your deck has enough value. You don't need that token later on in the game. But if you're in a deck that plays lots of 1 and 2 and 3 mana cards, right, then you can play that MERS early and then your very next turn on 4 mana, you can play a 2 and 2/1s and cycle a card, and like you're so close to getting it back already, and it's only been 1 turn since you played it. If you play MERS, you cycle a card, you play 3 cards, you cycle a card. Next turn, you cycle a card. Like you've already moved through over half of your deck. You've got a very good chance of finding that on your 5 mana turn, and you're almost guaranteed to get it on your 6 mana turn, right? So just the cards that
You
you
say that,
play
man.
the cards that you play are not as important as the number of cards that you can play. And in the same way with like a Giovanna deck, right? Like we talked about this early on. We were on that Winter Rush bandwagon early freeloader because we had that realization. Like it's just about finding that combo on 5 mana consistently. And to find the combo on 5 mana consistently, all you have to do is just move through your deck as fast as you can until you get the cards you need.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a huge problem. I don't know if you remember it. Right when we were experimenting with it, I had a wonderful run of it. And then somebody suggested I add Mistwives to the deck because there's, why not? Like that would be really good. And I suddenly started holding on to Mistwives when I found it early so that I could because I was hitting like 75-80% of the time. I was hitting Icicle Chev on 5. And suddenly I start holding on to Mistwives on my early turns when I find it because I'm expecting on mana turn 5 to have my Icicle Jev, and my hit rate on that combo dropped to below 50% because I'm no longer playing the maximum number of cards and cycling like I was before. Just having Mistwives in that deck was changed my behavior, and my behavior was so detrimental to the deck it killed it. So I had to learn to just throw away Mistwives if I didn't have a good play with it because it was not helping me get to the real power turn. The real power turn is Icicle Chev. And once you can kind of learn that about your deck, what are the cards that you really need to cycle into? Then you can start to learn that, yeah, this other part, this is Ubis is cool, but no, we don't hold it. Like Thomas yelled at me a couple of times last time we were streaming together. Thomas is like, why are you holding on to Loris? If you don't have good value with Loris right now, get rid of it. And it took me a little bit to learn that. But Thomas, thank you.
Absolutely. Generally, my rule of thumb is if it's larger than my mana cost of what I can play, I discard it. That is something that I need to get better at, though, because sometimes there is a card that is just so good that most likely in 2 turns you want to play it regardless. So even I struggle with cycling quite a bit.
Yeah, you don't play a lot of Gift of the Wise decks with that kind of attitude.
Yeah, I know. I'm not great with them.
So what are we taking away from all of this tonight? Like this conversation's been exactly what I was hoping it would be, right? We've been not necessarily writing the 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 guide, but we've been talking about some of the aspects of the guide, some of the concepts in the guide that hit home with us. And I feel like, I mean, personally, I've learned a couple of things tonight already, which feels great. But what are the kind of the big takeaways of all of this?
That is the point. Literally, the point is that I think each of us have actually learned a few things tonight, but that's going to also mean that we're going to each individually think about each of these things, and that should be hopefully what we're passing on to our listeners and anyone that then reads the guide that you guys put together. Every single bullet point, every single thing is, what about this? Just spend an extra 30 seconds thinking about it and what you want to do with that thought and that strategy going forward. Then just maybe focus on just one thing, play 5 or 10 games just focusing on that one thing, and then move on to the next one and just keep rinsing and repeating.
I had not thought about doing that. Just like trying to be super mindful of a thing that you recognize as your weakness. Like just dive into it for
Or
like
even your
really lean into
strength,
it.
even if it's a strength, just to be conscientious that I think that I am a good aggro player. Maybe I should get a little bit better at it. There's nothing that says that you are already good enough in a particular thing. So it's all about what you're currently wanting to do. So I see no reason why a person shouldn't focus on all of them. Just
Now that Reckless is retired from the game, Thomas, the premier aggro player badge is up for grabs.
ooh, tempting.
You'll have to beat Sabaiku to earn it, though. The two of you are super aggressive players. Sabaiku, I want to leave. I want your opinions on this. Zalay, like him, hate him, whatever. But he had one piece of advice that always stuck with me. And Mock has these two great parts right now, dealing with randomness and mindset. And the one and only thing I've ever taken away from watching all of Zalay's streams that I did was this one thing he said kind of offhandedly. Somebody said something about, oh man, you didn't get what, like you had a 1 in 3 chance of getting the card that you needed to win that game. You were unlucky. And Zalay was like, yeah, I was unlucky. That was very unlucky. We played to our outs. But here's the thing. my opponent was probably unlucky on 4 or 5 different moments that we don't even think about right now. Like everybody has a bad point in the game. Everybody has the RNG go against them every game. It's not just the ones that you think of. There's a lot of points where things go south, and it's about how you handle those moments, right? Like things go bad for both players every game. It's just a question of which one of them handles it better and moves on and continues.
Yep. Keep an even head. Keep playing the game, right? That's all you can do. Like just the game isn't over just because you got unlucky. The game's still going on, so finish it out. And then at the end of the game, if you're dwelling on it, if it's annoying you, walk away. Go do some push-ups, go do some burpees, come back and
Oh God, don't do that.
and then come back to it after you get some of that frustration out.
Definitely don't do burpees. I'm sorry. Mock, you don't have burpees in this guide anywhere, do you?
No,
It
there's
should be actually after
No,
every
no,
no
paragraph.
do not.
burpees. No
Every
burpees.
paragraph, do 5 burpees.
Wow.
Have you thought about this? No, go do burpees. No. But
There is something to taking a step back. Maybe that's, what burpees is standing in for, because you have to, my last little bit on like reviewing your game, some questions are best asked in the cold light of failure. You won't always know why you lose, but sometimes you see things. So you 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 will learn a lot. Ask yourself, how did I lose? Ask yourself whether you overplayed, whether you were playing too defensively. If you were unlucky, is there some thing that you can do about that? Right, because we have that section on like RNG effects. Like by definition, you can't control them, but you can shape them, you can constrain them. If there's 6 different things that can happen to an opponent's unit, because that, I don't know, they're going to get some benefit, you might be able to remove one of those options and make it so that, only 5 of his units can benefit from, I don't know, some buff that's going to happen when you destroy
our tigers are
something.
about to trade.
Like there's constraints, and again, playing along the edges, but you have to be willing to ask yourself, when you're calm after the fact, or maybe in a moment you need to be calm because you have to keep your options open, but after the fact, like I rage quit all the time. I freely admit this. I rage quit, and then I have a think, and was I unlucky? And then sometimes you just you just eat the wrong end of the luck stick. But other times you're like, well, no, I actually I had options and I didn't take them. And being willing to review your game, I mean, this is true in chess, this is true in Go. That is the way that you can really improve. But you can't do it if you're just mad, or if you're just like, oh, my opponent was lucky, or the RNG in this game, and it has RNG, makes me too mad to think about it.
See, my opponent being lucky is actually like a big relief too. Like this happens all the time when I stream. I'll ask Sabaiku after we lose a game, what did we do wrong? What could we have done different? And if his answer is, dude, nothing.
Nothing.
We played it right. He just got lucky. Then I'm just like, all right, well, F him, but I'm ready to move on. Like this is great. Like that's good news for me. Right? Like congratulations to him. He got to be really lucky, and now I can move on. It's the points of, oh gosh, we didn't think about this, or we didn't think about that, or we should have done this, or we debated too long and then we roped and then you didn't get your last card played. That's like probably the largest slice of the pie. Is we tried to do the math or whatever for so long, and then you didn't get 2 of your cards out of your hand before the rope ended.
Right. Well, there is this in the game moment where you can start becoming reactive. You're just like, oh, I'm starting to get desperate, and you're sort of insta countering everything your opponent does, and you're really not at that moment considering your options. You probably are playing too defensively, because that's what happens when people are under threat. They they start playing defensively, which is, I guess, why it's at the top. And so, I want to say, like, you have, I don't know how many seconds you actually have to make a turn, but
That's a good
it's
question. I
actually
don't know
quite a
either.
bit, which is not to say that you should like annoy your opponent by dragging every move out, but like go ahead and take that time, especially if you're feeling like, "Ooh, I might lose this one." Take your time and make your best play, and you're going to win or you're not going to win, but it'll still be your best play.
I think that's a great way to end this. So that's going to end the main portion of this episode, which means it's time for me to remind you to please contact us, preferably in our channel on the Stormbound Discord server or on Twitter at Brewed Sages. You can always email us as well at thebrewedsages@gmail.com. This week, we heard from an old pal. Ubermensch is back. He said, I love this kind of intro so much. Not going to lie, I've missed this game. I'm finally back at it after 9 months. This game is much more fresh than when I left. Draft is amazing. Agreed, sir. It is. And Guardy the Lightbringer got to be my most favorite Stormbound art ever. My old Diamond 2 deck still works. Well, at least in the Silver League with level 3 card caps. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much, Mock, for being here. This was awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it was great.
For Subaiku and Thomas, I am Freeloader. We are the Brewed Sages reminding you to stay hydrated.